Today's guest is Jeanne Blasberg, and Jeanne is an author. She is getting ready to publish her third book. And Jeanne is also busy building a regenerative farm, which I didn't know anything about this type of farm, but it's really she and her husband are experimenting with a new model of sustainability for mostly vegetables. And it was quite interesting, very unexpected because I thought we were mostly going to talk about her book, but I did think that this one aspect, which was in her bio, was interesting. Yet it's predominantly what we talked about because it is something that she came across in because she was in this mode of looking for a way that she could bring value to the world. And it just so happened that with her expertise or her passion in gardening and her husband's experience in the food industry led them to be a perfect pair to be buying and building this business and this farm in Wisconsin. And mind you, they were living in Boston, raising three kids. Then after COVID, they were looking at their life thinking they were collecting all these things. They wanted a simpler life. They really needed a change. And so they moved, they up and moved, sold a lot of things, sold their place in Boston, moved to Park City, Utah. And now they're in the process of getting this farm business up and running. So, quite an interesting story. We talk about not only what she's been doing, how COVID impacted her, how she and we'll use the term reinvented herself, but she and I both have our own opinions about that word, and so you'll hear about that, and it's just a really wonderful conversation with someone who at 58 years old is really starting over with something that she's very passionate about and I know is going to be super successful at. And that isn't even the book she's about to publish, which I think will probably do well as well. So, without further ado, let's get to the conversation that I had with Jeanne. Welcome to another episode of Living Your Sparked Second Half. And today I have with me Jeanne Blasberg. And she came to me through her publicist and because she's an author. And I thought I always love having authors because authors have there's so much to talk about and every book is different. And I think everybody has a book inside of them. That's what I always like to say, even though my podcast is not specifically about books. But I always find that there's such great stories behind every author, and that authors usually have done other things. Very few people have written for their whole lives, but there's usually other careers to discuss. There's what led to the book, and there's stories behind that. And Jeanne has written three books now, or her third one is about to be published. So we have a lot to talk about. Plus, she's just recently purchased a farm. And so there's that to talk about. So we might go all over the place in this conversation. So welcome to the program, Jeanne.
Thanks, Lori. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, yes. So what would you say if somebody was meeting on the street? Like if they said, oh, so hi, Jeanne, you know how everybody does. What do you do?
What do I do? Well, I think it's been like a 58-year journey of self-discovery. But the one common thing, in being a mom of three kids and being a writer and someone who's always had their hands in the garden, I'm creative. There's always some manifestation of that creativity. I'm also an athlete, a squash player and a skier. And though those aren't necessarily creative endeavors, they're endeavors in which I'm completely in the present moment.
Yes, I was
So
going to
I
say
think
that.
there's some similarity between sports and creativity in terms of being able to put other things out of your mind.
Yeah, I
But
think I think sometimes if you get into competitive sports, not so much, but like the ones you describe, I think are things that too you could do with there's a lot of thinking going on. Like skiing is such a great sport for that. It's funny
Yeah, I
too.
mean,
You hadn't mentioned that you were an athlete, but you look like an athlete.
oh, thank you. I think hopefully I look healthy because we've been doing this farming and my food is such nutritious, healthy food that I've been eating that it's showing its benefits. But I've
Now it
always
said lettuce farming. Is it a variety of lettuce?
vegetables, yeah, with
Okay, veg.
26 varieties of veggies that are going into these salad bowls that are then sold through Forage Kitchens. So there's 6 different types of peppers, tomatoes, fennel, dill, green onion, garlic. I mean, we're growing a lot of things. So
Plus, there's all different kinds of lettuce.
right. Romaine, arugula, we've got a mix. Yeah, there's a lot of lettuce, but um
Yeah. And this is in Wisconsin, so people would
right.
might know. And now it's interesting because I would think Wisconsin, if you were asking me like where would be a good place to farm, I wouldn't think that a place that cold would be a good because you think farming is limited to warm weather. Is
That's
that
true.
crazy to think?
No, no, you're spot on. But Wisconsin is America's dairy land. So it's kind of the home of dairy farming. There are a lot of smaller dairy farms, which is something that can go on 12 months a year. There's also a lot of cranberries that are grown in Wisconsin, and then an incredible amount of corn and soy, which is a rotation. Farmers grow, and it's primarily for animal feed. So a lot of the upper Midwest grows grains for animal feed and might specialize in other things that can happen 12 months a year. Most of our country's veggies do come from California and Arizona and places that are more mild year round. But with technology and greenhouses, we are able to grow veggies. And it's funny, the USDA considers vegetables a specialty crop, although it's so foundational to like the food pyramid, eating all your greens. It's not something that a lot of people have regionally. So part of what we're trying to do is strengthen a local food system with all types of food that we need to eat and depend less on transporting food and also depending less on mass production of food. So if you grow it on a smaller scale, closer where the consumers are, you can grow it in a much more healthy way. And I can go into a million reasons why. But as I think I told you, my husband and I took on this farm 2 years ago, and this is a grand experiment where we are really beginners at this. And we've associated ourselves with a team of people who aren't beginners, but we're trying to do farming a little bit differently than it's been done in Wisconsin. So, yeah, our neighbors do look at us and like, what are you growing? How do you think you're going to make any money growing vegetables?
So how did you get into this? Because when I read the email from your publicist, it was like, you're an author. And then there's this whole other side to you, which
Yeah,
would really made me want to talk to you. And so what you mentioned that COVID, your husband, he probably went to a job and he then the world changes and you have a virtual job so it allows more flexibility. So
mhm,
you were in Boston, you moved to Utah, you're in Park City right now, great place to ski. Went there for the first time a couple of years ago, amazing place. Unfortunately it wasn't ski season, and then you bought this farm in Wisconsin. So like you are doing things that didn't seem like they were in the natural path forward based
yeah.
on your past, which is so interesting as well. So, what put you on this path? How did you come up with it? And you also mentioned that you like to garden. So, it sounds like you had some affiliation with that.
Yeah. I like to point to COVID, but maybe this was in the works for a long time subconsciously. And that period, maybe I was mentioning my husband grew up on Beacon Hill. My in-laws lived around the corner from us. We lived in a large home that required a lot of upkeep. And when my kids all left the nest, I kind of felt like I was becoming my mother-in-law, just taking care of the house. And it was a great family house, but it had kind of turned into a museum of the way our life used to be. When COVID hit, I think like the disquiet and the unease I felt with the life I was living really rose to the surface, and probably similar to what a lot of people had epiphanies as you're kind of faced with how you're living your life because all of a sudden it's stopped and you're looking out at the issues in the world, whether it's food insecurity or racism or the climate, and feeling kind of helpless and a little hopeless. And I think I may have had mental health roller coaster issues that kind of came about during COVID. But I looked at my family and I was like, I want my life to be different. My in-laws both died during COVID, and so I was in the process of selling their belongings and their house. And I was like, I think I'm just going to keep going and sell all our stuff too. So anyway, John and I looked at each other one night and we were like, let's just do something. We're so lucky because our kids are kind of launched and doing fine. We don't have parents who are needing us, like a lot of people our age are tending to aging parents. So we have very few responsibilities in that way. We're both fairly young and healthy, and we have some flexibility and resources. Like we can make a change and work virtually. So,
That's great, by the way, that because you had mentioned that you've been married, you met in college, married
mhm.
34 years. It's great that he was on board with that because sometimes it's a time where you
Well,
veer apart.
yeah, he'd been working for the same firm and he's still working there, but his role has changed. But when you work for the same place for 30 years, I think you get to this, and he'd also grown up in Boston. So there'd been a lot of things that were very state static for him. And I think my wanting a big change and his receptiveness had to do with the fact that he also probably wanted to change, although he is very responsible and the breadwinner basically in the family, and so is pretty conservative. And his job has been so much in the food system and a lot with consumer products companies that have made processed food and all the snack foods that might be some of the problem. I think he kind of changed roles to get a little bit more out of that and work more on sustainability and ESG issues. The idea of experimenting or seeing if there's something, a new model possible on our own farm is was really appealing. He probably came at it more from the business side, and I came at it more from protecting the earth and the topsoil.
Which is
But
a great,
together,
that's like when you think about it, the two
yeah,
best
yeah, we make a
minds
good,
coming together for different
yeah.
reasons, but ultimately to for the world to
You know,
benefit
it's
from.
been really great for our marriage too, because instead of hovering over our kids and like what's going on in their lives and calling them all the time and talking between ourselves over dinner about this thing or that thing, that might be kind of petty or gossipy. Like we're trying to run a business together and we're dealing with all of the issues that go with starting something up, from writing an employee handbook and what are the benefits going to be that we offer our employees, to purchasing tractors, to drilling wells and building greenhouses, and dealing with our customer who's this chain of fast casual restaurants. John actually sits on the board and is an advisor to that restaurant chain. So he deals a lot with the big picture, like strategy with our farm and like really trying to be cutting edge with technology. And I am kind of the day to day, like making sure people are paid on time and get the right benefits and have the right gear and creating the budgets and managing the construction on site. So
I
it's
see
been good.
that what you are also experiencing is you're able to get this fresh perspective of your partner and what their strengths are. And that is such a cool thing that
Yeah,
he might not have even seen you in this light before. And
yeah,
you get me because even though you live with him and you know he works, like you rarely probably get to see him in action in his job. And so I
yeah,
love that about that. So
yeah.
let's go back to your book because or you the fact that you're an author and this is your third book, and you did make mention of the fact that since this is your third, you went all in with the other two in terms of going like to all the bookstores and to really
Yeah.
marketing it and publishing it. And you're like, and now I've got other things going on. And I didn't know when you said that the extent of what you've got going on. And it
Yeah.
so makes sense. So how did you do? And I also want to ask you because it sounds to me like you feel there's this sense of, well, you're passionate about this thing and that you feel this value that you're putting out in the world. And there's a value that you can get from publishing a book, and there's this value that you can get from trying this new
Growing
model of
lettuce.
food delivery and sustainability, et cetera. So yeah, how are you balancing it? Is
Hmm.
one question. And the second question, I just would like to hear a little bit about how you got into writing. Have you done it for a long time?
Okay.
And maybe just touch on what your new book is as
Yeah.
well.
Okay. So I'll try to answer all those questions that came out. Please interrupt me if I'm going on too long. But as I mentioned, the farm was just an idea during COVID. And also during COVID, I was drafting this novel that's coming out in 2 weeks called Daughter of a Promise. And that my writing regimen really kept me sane during those days of being sequestered in our home with our 3 kids. They had all come home for different reasons. So we were all kind of working in different workstations. So the book was getting written. And then the following year, I was in a fellowship at Stony Brook and really worked on polishing the book. In the time when the book was in its final edits was really when the farm came into our lives and we got going. So that was about 2 years ago. And that just goes to show how long a publishing queue can be. So luckily, this book was basically, in all intents and purposes, written by the time the farm came into our lives. So I don't think I could really have written a book and taken the amount of brain space that's needed if I also had some of these things going on. I'm actually writing some nonfiction essays right now, and it's proving to be difficult with just the things that come up on a day-to-day basis. Although it's not impossible, but it's way more challenging.
Well,
Um,
I hope you're journaling because your
every morning.
experience is
Yeah,
like
yeah.
what you need to keep
Yeah.
track of all the highs and lows and write a book about that at some point.
That's exactly what I'm thinking for my next project is about my experience with food kind of as a memoir woven in with the opening days of this farm or opening years and also some stuff about the food systems. But we'll see. So,
So perfect
um,
timing, by
yeah,
the
the
way, that
timing
that
kind of
came
worked
up
out
and
well.
yeah.
Although people who don't understand the long lead time in book publishing kind of look at me like everything's happening simultaneously and that I'm an absolute crazy person. But luckily there are. So moving forward, however, you go from this amazing period of creation and artistic expression, which is very joyful and internal, to being a self-promoter when the book comes out and being somebody who really has to be the spokesperson for their own work and is really, your publisher can throw as much marketing or advertising behind it as they're able to, and I'm with a small press, so it's not that much, and then it's a lot of me, right? Whereas I was going to a lot of bookstores in the past, and that was pre-COVID, and they're like virtual book clubs didn't even exist and people didn't do as much online. With this book, I'm doing things like this podcast, and I am hopefully speaking in ways that I can reach lots of people. And I will be doing some in-person events in the communities, in the literary communities that I have like strong ties to, but I'm not going to be doing a crazy book tour. And I vacillate in every day. I'm like, I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough. But, I feel so joyful and grateful that this book exists. I think I'm most proud of this book out of all 3 of my books. And the fact that it's out there and it's getting great reviews is very gratifying. And,
Is
I'm
that
just
just the
kind
people you've shared it with? That
of like the
if it
trade,
hasn't
like,
come out yet, how are you getting
so
reviews?
So it comes out on April 2nd, but 8 months ago, advanced reader copies come out and go to the media. and trade publications such as Kirkus gave it a starred review, and other venues have given it great accolades. So I'm very pleased by that. And I'm also kind of putting this out in the hands of the universe. I feel like I have some readers, and this book will take on a life of its own. I do have that experience from the first two of knowing that with Eden, which came out in 2017, I'm still getting emails from people who are discovering it in one way or another. So I just have to kind of have that faith that I've done this, and I'm not going to compare myself or my book tour or the number of appearances I'm doing with other authors who
Mhm.
are launching
Yeah.
books at the same time. That's really an easy thing to get into.
So,
Um,
so if I do the math, it sounds like you said you're 58, and this book came out 7 years ago, the first book. You didn't get into writing until you were really later in life, which I love. I'd love to hear what got you into that space. As you finally have time? I take that you were a stay-at-home mom for with the kids.
so I worked until my kid, well, I'll take you back a little ways. I was in the retailing industry in Cincinnati at Federated Department Stores, moved to Boston with one child, and began working at Harvard Business School, where I wrote cases for the retailing professor based on a lot of the work I had done in the industry. And then I had a second child, and the writing and writing the cases and doing the research turned into something I just loved. And I had always loved creative writing. I took a lot of writing classes in college. But I was thinking this is something I can do and balance spending time with my kids. So the professor I was working for retired, and I had another child. So my kids are like 3 kids in 4 years. So it was a good time for me to step back from having deadlines. And I start living in downtown Boston. I was able to take all sorts of adult education classes. Once I had the ability to bring babysitters in, I was going to the Harvard Extension School at night or the Cambridge School for Adult Education or taking other classes. At first I thought maybe I'll be a journalist, and then but the writing was always something I really wanted to do. And I started writing a lot of essays, and then I had an idea for a novel. And so you say, like, I'm 58, my first book came out 7 years ago, but I'd have to say it was some time in my early 40s that I had the idea for this novel, and I started trying to craft it. I mean, if at the end of the day, Eden, which is my first novel, is like 100,000 words, I think I wrote a million words. I didn't really
Wow.
know what I was doing. I was writing and trying to figure out what the story was. I had these characters and this situation in my head. We were living abroad for several years, and I came back from that experience with a first draft, or not a first draft, what I thought was a final manuscript that I was marketing to agents, and soon learned that it didn't have enough of a plot. The characters were great, and these women, these 4 generations of women, were great. And that's when I discovered Grub Street, which is a creative writing center in Boston. So for the first time, I really got tutelage in the craft of the novel and the inner story and the outer story.
Yeah.
And I've been ever since a true student and continue to take classes. And I mentioned that I was in that fellowship with Stony Brook. And I think there's something that happens to your brain when you read a lot of novels and you try to write novels, and you're basically studying or trying to replicate the hero's journey or the heroine's journey, if you will. And you're constantly writing about the transformation of characters. I think you see your own life as an opportunity to be transformed. I mean, how can you not? So, where
Yeah.
your characters all have an arc, I do want to get back to that moment during COVID. It kind of was, there was an inciting incident at which I felt everything had to change and nothing could be the same. And maybe I was open to that idea because I see it on paper all the time, or I try to replicate it on paper all the time. And I think also your listeners who appreciate a next chapter, we do come to this point where, you're not going to be on this planet much longer, and you only get one shot. And whereas you could be conservative in your 30s and 40s because you might be worried about saving enough money for this or that, when you get to a certain age and you're like, the math works, I think we're going to be okay, if you're lucky enough to say that, or you might have to sell things and make changes in order to be able to say, if we simplify, we can be okay. There's this moment of feeling so brave. Everyone's like, why Wisconsin? Do you have family in Wisconsin? I'm like, no, I've never been to Wisconsin before. But I knew someone there who wanted to work on a farm. And he introduced us to this chain of restaurants that was going to be an amazing partner and customer. So, the bravery kind of comes with age. And also we might not know anything about farming, but we know how to think through problems and how to assess a situation. And, so much in business and so much in writing, or whether it's farming or working with people, is trying to make smart decisions that kind of leave your options open as you're trying to
Yeah,
figure
and finding
things
the right
out.
people. It sounds like you're
Yeah.
building a team with the
Mhm.
people that have the knowledge that you lack. And so finding, like, knowing what your weaknesses are and how to find the people that counteract that is terrific. So the word reinvention, because you wanted me to ask you about that
Yeah.
word, tell me what you think about that word.
I guess the reason I had prodded you to ask me that question is because when my novels came out, I think a lot of people had looked at me from the outside and been like, oh, she's a great squash player. I mean, I was doing a lot of nonprofit volunteer things, but I think people looked at me as a stay-at-home mom who probably, you get judged as having a certain level of ambition or a certain amount of intellect. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, I wrote like this very ambitious novel that might have surprised a lot of people who only knew me very superficially. And I'd get this comment, I love the way you've reinvented yourself.
Ah.
And, at first it felt somewhat like a backhanded compliment, or I didn't know if it was a total compliment. But in my latest novel, my main character also like reinvents herself, or you might think that. But when people undergo great change, it's usually because there's been like a life altering situation, whether it's a tragedy, or in our case, it was like COVID, but something kind of breaks you open. And so reinvention is sometimes out of necessity, right? So I don't know. I just think about that a lot, but I think instead of reinvention, I think we're all on this path of discovering who we really are. I know
Yeah.
a lot of people have probably read Michelle Obama's Becoming, and that really struck a chord with me too, because it's not like you ever quite figure out who you are and how you want to spend your time. I think the happiest people are constantly revising,
Mm.
revising how they spend their time, what their days look like, who they spend their time with, what they feel is worthwhile, what difference they want to make in the world. I
Yeah.
hope so. So I don't know that you necessarily have to do what my husband and I did and like sell a big thing, although it was a very gradual selling off of things in order to do something like the farm. I'm a big believer in like monthly reassessments and experiments of possible change. We do this thing where for a month we'd drink no alcohol, or then for a month we'd go to bed at 9 o'clock and wake up at 5 o'clock, or for a month we'd have no gluten, or for a month we'd write a letter to a different friend every day. And we literally did these month-long experiments, and like some of the stuff sticks with you and you're like, I want to keep doing that one. And other things are like, yeah, I'm not going to bed at 9 o'clock for the rest of my life, but it was nice to get a lot of sleep.
To me, when you say that, you talk about the person or people who said, "Oh, I like the way you reinvented yourself." To me, after interviewing so many people and me going through my experience of change, in my second half. I think that what happens to many of us is we suppress who we really are to either get the job done that we think needs to get done or to please the people that we want to please for a variety of reasons. So for me and what I see happen to you, it's like this your bud is finally blossoming, you know? It's like who Jeannie really is being allowed to shine now. Jeannie, and you talked about bravery. So it's like you get to a point where you're like, there is no other choice because it's more scary to stay in the fake version of you than it is to live the real version of you. And so we become less attached to having to be this person we think we need to be.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a reinvention. It's the allowing the full blossoming of who's really there inside and
Yeah,
then
Lori,
allowing other people to see that.
you said that beautifully. I 100% agree. And I love the image of blossoming. And really, it's never too late to let go of that fear or to face that fear. Like you said, it's even more scary to stay in the persona that's accepted and viewed by everyone on the outside as like a very successful, happy existence.
Yeah.
But inside, you're like, this is not who I was meant. This is not me, and not the reason I was put on this planet.
Yeah, I
Um,
think that's what causes the mental health issues or the the pain is trying to stay in there and to keep yourself from opening up. To wrap it up, I have a couple questions I want to end with, and I do like to ask these questions. One is, what advice would you give your younger self from the point at which you are today?
yeah. Well, I've always been a worrier, even when I was, I don't know, this probably goes back to childhood trauma, but like I was always worried I was going to miss the school bus or the school bus wouldn't come. I think those are some of the first worries. I really wish I hadn't worried so much because I do think a lot of the decisions I made have to do with wanting a sense of security and not wanting to worry. And
Yeah.
I think things would have all worked out how they were supposed to, but I probably wouldn't have given myself stomach aches and over things, and I probably would have experienced more joy as a younger person and had more happiness if I hadn't been such a worrier.
Yeah. There would be a lot of value if that was in an elementary school curriculum instead of what if the bad things happened? What if the good things happened? What if you could
Totally.
manifest the positive
Yeah,
outcome instead of the negative? Because that's where our mind tends to go. But
totally.
yeah, that's so true.
I took
And
a little mini course in miracles about a year ago, a course in miracles for writers. And yeah, just the mantra of heal my fear-based thinking like every day and noticing what's based in fear and what the alternative is. And it's just endless possibility, right?
mhm, yeah, and focusing on what you want to happen and not what you don't want to happen, because that ends up you get what you don't want. Dang it. It just happens.
Yeah.
And then last but not least, because I think I know because it's you just shine and sparkle when you talk about it, but what sparks you about your life today?
Oh, well, let's see. It's March 20th as we're speaking. And on April 7th, I'm going to start my drive to the farm.
Mm.
And I know I've talked a lot about the food and the food systems and the importance of what we're doing. But when I'm on the farm and I wake up in the morning to the sound of all the migratory birds that come through the Midwest, it is, I cannot wait. My husband's there right now, and I'm like, are the birds singing yet? Are the birds singing yet? And he's like, not quite. So I'm worried with the warmer winter, maybe I'm gonna miss it. But anyway, being in nature, I feel like we're trying to heal the soil, but I feel like the farm is healing me and turning me into
Oh,
just a happier person. And the worries do start melting away when I'm in that landscape. They kind of melt away when I'm here in the mountains as well. But the the wildlife is way more present on the farm. And I just can't tell you how much that bird song has, how much joy it's brought me and awe. Really, I never, it almost sounds like it's piped in on a stereo, how constant and varied and loud it is. I just love it. So I can't wait to wake up to all those birds singing.
That's amazing. And this might sound weird, but I mean, people might think, oh, inanimate objects don't have like feelings, but I choose to believe they do. And because it's everything's energy, right? And I feel like your farm is very, very happy. Your farm is very lucky to have you. The
Uh,
farm feels this like caring that you're bringing to it.
well, I'm a member of a team that's bringing a lot of love to this endeavor. So
Yes.
I
And
do
finding
feel
the
like
team that
this,
feels the same. Yeah.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
amazing.
there's people who care a lot about the soil on our team, and we just, yeah, we're all on the same page as far as that's concerned. But we're doing serious work, but we're trying not to take ourselves too seriously. So it's got to be fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
hmm
based on what you just said, it made me think how much of my life I've gone through without hearing those sounds and how I do pay attention so much more now to that and am much more in tune to that. And so, I would like this episode to be a lesson for people to tune into that more because I think that would be amazing if just everybody spend a little more time in nature and spend a little bit more time listening to what they maybe don't hear a lot of that is
Yeah.
there. And it's cheap entertainment, right?
Yeah, I know everybody might not be into camping, but to wake up in a place that's totally quiet, it's that morning time also. I've had it before when I've woken up in a tent or I've woken up, you know, you might have to let go of some of your modern conveniences, but even if just for a weekend you go up and wake up in nature to that quiet stillness around dawn where all you hear are the little skittering of animals and birds. It's so
Mhm.
healing and it's takes you back to what's really like elemental.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Well, thank you so much for this unexpected journey of like learning all about your life and so much more than your most recent book. So
Yeah.
back to the book. You said it's called a, can you say what it is again?
It's called Daughter of a Promise.
Daughter of a Promise.
Mhm.
And it comes out April 2nd, I think you said.
Correct. It's available for pre-order now
Mhm.
on most of your retailers, but hopefully if it's not in your local bookstore on April 2nd, you can ask for it. It should be available wherever books are sold.
Okay. Yeah. And you can Google it to see more about what it's about because we didn't spend much time talking about it.
I know. I also, just to say, I have a website, jeanneblasberg.com, where you can read about the three books and it gives you opportunities to order and learn more about all three of the books, which kind of are a trilogy in a way. We never even got
Oh,
into that, but
oh, okay. Yeah.
they
That's
read
good to know.
separately, but they really all are part of my greater imaginary world.
Oh, that's great. Well, yeah, we'll put the links to your website and also your social media on in the show notes. Thanks so
Okay.
much.
Thanks, Lori. You were amazing. Thanks for all the great questions.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.